Thank you for checking out Real Talk Personal Finance. Shit's about to get real. Cash Flow King with you today. And in today's episode, we have yours truly, the Cash Flow King, on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, their podcast episode number 360. Before we get into that, just want to do a few quick shout outs. First of all, want to give a big, warm welcome to all listeners that found and are now listening to the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast as a result of my appearance on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. So welcome to the show. Feel free to go back in the archives and listen to however many episodes you'd like. We have a lot of different topics here at Real Talk Personal Finance. We have some great guests. As I mentioned on my appearance on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, we all go by code names, so feel free to pick your favorite one, go through the archives, and listen to whatever it is you like. We hope you enjoy the show and you guys stick around. So for those that may not be familiar with the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, I actually have been a fan of that show and still am for probably at least a couple years now. I've listened to that show, and that's a very interesting show. You have a lot of different people from diverse backgrounds that all have one thing in common, and that's that their net worth is at least $1 million, but you have folks that are kind of just getting started, right at $1 million or just north of $1 million, all the way up to, I think there was somebody that was, their episode aired right before mine was recorded, that was worth well over $50 million. So you're going to have just a whole bunch of different people, a bunch of different backgrounds, and just really be able to hear their journeys and how they did it and what they're up to and just their thoughts and philosophies on personal finance, which is always very interesting to hear it directly from the sources. So I thought that was pretty cool. And when Jace and Stacy were looking for guests coming up for 2024 on their show, I decided to, for the first time, write in and mention that I'd like to be a guest on the show, and the rest is history. So we actually recorded this episode that I'm going to play for you guys. This is going to be scheduled to come out on June 10th on my show, the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast. We recorded this on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast back in early January of 2024. I'll give you guys a quick update at the end of this episode, but just so you know from a timing standpoint, this was recorded back in early January of 2024, and we're going to go ahead and get it out to you guys now. I wanted to also give a special shout out to actually two different listeners that have written into the Real Talk Personal Finance podcast from the Millionaires Unveiled show at the time of this recording. So we have Brian P. Brian, thanks for your note. I'm glad we were able to point you in the right direction and you were able to find us on your podcast player of choice. And Kevin H., shout out to you. Best of luck with the whole turnkey rental thing. I wrote you a pretty lengthy response back, and hopefully you have a chance to go back and check out the episode that we did on turnkey rentals. If you have any other questions, feel free to write the show, and happy to continue to communicate with you guys and try to be a resource and be as helpful as we can be. So I think that's about it. So again, this was recorded back in January of 2024. This was just aired on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast on June 3rd, which was Monday. So it's been out at the time of this recording for a couple of days. By the time you guys hear this, it will have been out for about a week. I hope you guys enjoy it. I was quite honestly debating on whether or not I wanted to play this on this show. It gives you a little glimpse into me as the Cash Flow King and kind of my journey, a little bit more about my background, and really you get to hear me talk in a very non-explicit way. A lot of times on this show, I feel like I'm cutting up and, dropping F-bombs and just having a good time, and I had a blast on that show, but I kept it very professional and tried not to be too vulgar at all. So you guys will get to hear that. And it's really, me being a little bit vulnerable too. Like I said, I know I have a lot of family members and close friends that listen to this show. And obviously I believe we're up to 45 countries now. We were at 44. And quite frankly, I need to pull the list and see our newest edition. So my apologies. We'll have a couple of additional announcements on the next episode. But, I wasn't sure if I wanted to air this show or not because I really don't know how it's going to be perceived. But I hope that you will take it from the standpoint of this is sort of just a glimpse into me and my background and me kind of telling my story, and you'll get something out of it. So I don't play this to boast or brag or anything like that. It's basically out there for folks to hopefully get something out of, and hopefully something resonates with you and you pull a little nugget or two out of it and you enjoy it. So I really, really enjoyed being on the show. Once again, thank you to Jace and Stacy. For those that don't know, Jace Mattinson is a CPA. He's the one that runs the podcast, and his wife Stacy helps out sometimes with the recordings and some other things with the show. And so the particular night that we recorded, I recorded this with Stacy, so you'll hear her on the microphone doing the interview. It's the full interview. So they were nice enough to send over the audio file for me to play on this show, but of course it doesn't have their normal introduction and they say a few words before their show starts. That was not part of the audio file. So if you feel free to listen to it here, but if you also want to go and listen to it on their show directly, that's why I put it in parentheses. It is episode 360. And for any of my listeners that have not ever heard of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast, feel free to go ahead and check them out. I think they have some really good shows, like I mentioned just a few moments ago, and I really do think you'll get something out of it. So with all that said, and without further ado, I'm going to go ahead and play the episode for you, and then I'll jump back in at the end with a quick update.
Welcome back to another episode of the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. Today on the show, we have the Cash Flow King. Cash Flow King, do you want to tell us a little bit about your background and what you're up to now?
Sure. Yeah, thanks for having me on the show. I'm a huge fan, as I know we were talking for a couple minutes before we started here today. I am originally from the Northeast area of the country. I started off working in the consumer packaged goods industry. I was a district sales manager at the age of 22. Did that for a little while. And then a few years later, I actually moved out to the Midwest around age 26, which is where I am now. I was kind of looking for lower cost of living. I got into the financial services industry at the time, and that's currently what I'm still doing now. So I work as a financial advisor in the retirement services area. Recently married, no kids yet, but we just found out we got one on the way. So that's a little bit about me.
Congratulations. What a big life change on the way.
Thank you. Yeah.
All right. And what's your net worth today?
Net worth is just north of about $2 million. Breaks down to about 2.9 or so in assets and about 880 just under that in liabilities. Do you want me to run through? I kind of have a little breakdown here.
Yeah, that'd be great, please.
Okay. So about $1,028,000 or so, about 35% of the 2.9 in assets is in retirement accounts. A breakdown of that is approximately 72% pre-tax. About 28% of that is in Roth. There's about $420,000 or so in real estate related syndication. So that's about 15% of it. And that 420 breaks down about $145,000 in note funds, real estate note funds. There's about $100,000 in a couple different self-storage syndications. There's another 100 that's sort of blended in some funds that invest in a variety of real estate related things. So for example, mobile home parks, there's also some self-storage in there, some industrial and so forth. At this point, I did have a couple that exited. So there's only about 50,000 left in multifamily as far as syndications go. There was a little bit more than that previously. And then a really small amount, about 15,000 in some agricultural. And then this isn't really a real estate syndication. I just kind of grouped it in there. There's about 10,000 in a 529 and very little in the brokerage account at this point. Oh, keep going. Sorry. 917 is value of the single family rental portfolio. Currently, we have about 7 single family rentals. So that's about 32% of it. 130,000 in cash, which breaks down to about 53 in personal and about 77,000 in business. That's about 4.5%. And then I kind of grouped everything else into all else, was about 404. So that's everything from our primary residence, which is worth about 280, There's some jewelry in there for about $31,000, some vehicles, $41,000. I just threw the HSA in there at about $26,000. I mentioned briefly before we started recording that I recently purchased a Sea-Doo, so I threw that in there, and then just a little bit of cash on hand. So that rounds out the remaining approximately 14% on the asset side.
Wow, pretty diversified. Let's kind of dive into your story and how you got to where you are. So tell us how you started and what led you on your financial path.
Yeah, so when I first started, I didn't know anything about money. And even working in the industry, I feel like I learned something new pretty much every day. But I came from a pretty, middle to lower middle class upbringing and family. And really, as far as, financial advice, if you will, that I was given was just, hey, don't do what we did. Put something away for yourself from your very first paycheck, and you're never going to miss it. And I had no clue really what that meant. I knew we didn't have a lot of money, when I was growing up. But, just basically from the start. So at the age of 22, I started investing. And I think the very first thing that I did was I put anywhere from about 20 to 30% into my 401k plan. And that was back in, I think, 2006 or so. So right before things got really interesting in 08 and 09, and things were going down, down, down. And I really didn't understand what was going on. I just knew that someday that I would need to have some funds there for my future self, and just kept on putting money away. I then learned about things like Roth IRAs and started, contributing to that every year. And so really, one of the things I did from the start was just, if I had to rearrange things, put it this way, if I had to rearrange the asset allocation from a, total portfolio standpoint, at this point, I would probably shift things around, believe it or not, and have a little bit less in retirement and a little bit more in some non-retirement areas, just based upon financial flexibility. So I don't know that was necessarily a mistake, quote unquote, that I made, but it was just all I knew at the time, and it seemed like the right thing to do. So that's kind of how I got started. And then obviously, markets generally go up and things were going well. And I realized, I have the vast majority of my money at the time, and even kind of still today, in the market and locked up in retirement accounts. And for somebody that wants to potentially, retire early or become financially independent at a relatively early age, that wasn't necessarily conducive to what I was trying to do. And so I was looking for answers, and, people that work in the industry generally are all about the stock market. And again, there's nothing wrong with that. I'm, invested in the market and continue to do that. But I started trying to branch out a little bit. And I think that's where some of the real estate came in, because I wanted something that, could essentially pay me now and later, and, kind of was more conducive to the goal of that financial independence, and trying to get on that journey and, get assets now that would serve me well now and serve me well later. And so again, being new to it, I kind of dabbled a little bit in everything, and try to diversify fairly well within that. And maybe we'll get into this later, but there's some investments that I made that in hindsight, maybe I wish I didn't, and some other ones that have gone fairly well. And so that kind of, rounded things out from there, basically. So my focus now, I still do the retirement thing, kind of a hazard of what I do for a living. But at the same time, we're slowly trying to continue to grow the real estate side of the portfolio.
If you were to be able to go back in time and kind of reallocate your funds, what would that breakdown look like? Where, what kind of percentages do you think you'd like your net worth in each of those buckets?
It's a great question. And I kind of set myself up for a softball question, and I'm going to strike out on this one because I've not actually quantified that yet. So I don't have an exact percentage in terms of how I would like to see it. But just off the cuff, if I could say peel off maybe half or so of the assets that are locked in retirement accounts. So if we took that, just north of $1 million and pulled out about 500,000 and redeployed that into whether it be, cash flowing single family rentals or other types of syndications that produce current income, that would probably be something that I would like to see or would like to do. But, again, hindsight's 2020. So I don't, I can't really go back and change it, but I can change my focus now, which I have, and kind of going forward, kind of how we want things lined up. So I would, I don't have an exact percentage, but I would say I'd pull maybe half from the retirement and redeploy it into some of those real estate investments that are outside of retirement plans.
I don't think it was a swing and a miss. I think you still answered that question great.
Okay, good. All right.
So you're involved in a lot of syndications.
Mm-hmm.
Are you the primary investor in any of these other outside investments, or are they all syndications?
So the single family rentals are all turnkey, which we can get into if you want, and we have 7 of those. So those are directly owned by us essentially. So we own them in different entities. So for example, there's some that are held in an LLC, there's some that are held in a trust, and I don't know how far down in the weeds we want to get with that, but those are directly owned completely. And when I say completely, they have mortgages on them, but there's no other investors that have ownership or equity in those properties.
We meaning you and your wife or business partner, or
My wife, yes. I'm sorry, my wife. Yeah.
Got it.
So I had started beforehand. So there's some that I still have sort of in my company, and then we have a couple that are in the trust, which is kind of a joint thing. So it's divvied up a little bit. But yeah, it's either me and my wife that own them.
Okay.
But the syndications, I'm kind of a small fish in a big pond when it comes to that. So I am one of many investors that are in these different types of funds. In those syndications. So I'm not like a majority investor. I'm a limited partner in all of them. So I'm not a general partner. I'm not doing anything hands-on or anything like that. It's simply just strictly being a passive investor in those alongside many other people.
How did you find your syndications to invest in?
Good question. I think when you listen to enough podcasts like we all do, right, there's certain folks, certain companies, certain groups, certain names that seem to, what I like to call, run around in the circuit. So when I was kind of exploring real estate, there's a certain handful of podcasts. I mean, there's a million podcasts out there, right? But there's a certain grouping of them that are fairly popular, and you start to see certain guests that might be on multiple podcasts, and all of a sudden you become interested, you become curious, you want to learn more about that, find out more about that. And so really just a very long discovery process, everything from initially hearing somebody on a podcast to then connecting with them, talking with other investors that may or may not have already invested with them or know some information about them. And so I don't have a single answer other than, just becoming familiar. And then once you get involved and you get started and you talk to other investors that are in syndications, people start to share information. Hey, did you hear about this group? Or, hey, I didn't have such a great experience. Here's what happened to me. Not telling you what to do, but just be careful. And you start to hear different things. And so you can kind of, start your due diligence process that way. Or at least that's how I did.
Very good. I think that's a question a lot of people have is, I think that sounds interesting to invest in, but how do I even, get started? So even just having a little bit of a roadmap there can be helpful.
Mm-hmm.
I'd like to back up a little bit to kind of your career path.
Sure.
Because you went from consumer packaged goods to financial advising.
Mm-hmm.
How did we make that jump?
Well, I was in consumer packaged goods. The position itself was fine, but the hours sometimes were a little bit crazy. So I ran a route sales team for a very large company. Again, I was a district sales manager, and things, when they went well, they were going really well. But I had a person on my team sustain an injury. We didn't have necessarily a replacement for that person, and it turned into, I'm up at 3 a.m. and I'm working 12, 14, 16-hour days. And I remember talking, actually, somebody that I had graduated undergrad with who also worked with this company in the same position. And she said something to me one time. She said, Cash Flow King, if you want to work a 9 to 5, maybe you should look at a bank, right? And that kind of stuck with me for a while for whatever reason. And I had always talked to friends and family just, casually about personal finance. It was something that I just gradually developed an interest in. And I remember I've had a couple people say to me, you can probably make a pretty good living doing this. Like, there are people out there that are financial advisors that actually help other people with some of the stuff that we're already talking about, as basic as it was. And I had no idea. And so I said, oh, well, that sounds interesting to me. And at the same time, I was looking forward, looking ahead, just kind of being planning oriented. And I thought, well, I don't want to stay in the Northeast forever. No disrespect to anybody in the Northeast, was born and raised there, but kind of a lower cost of living, slower pace, just kind of wanted to take a step back and really try to find that balance. And so I put the two together. I had some family that relocated at the time out in this area. And I said, I came out to visit, and I said, I don't hate it. I don't know if I'm going to love it, but I think I'm going to move back home for a little while. So I actually did. And right around that time, I, decided, what, I'm going to give this a go. I'm going to make a career change and see what this financial services thing is all about. And then the rest is history. I've been in it now for 15 plus years, I guess.
Did you have to go to any additional schooling or receive any other certifications? What kind of time frame did this take to make that change?
Yeah, I did. So the first company that I worked for, a very large organization, they basically, and a lot of companies will, everyone's a little different, but they paid for everything. So I had to get licensed. So I have a Series 7 General Securities license. You have to get a Series 66 license. You have to get a life insurance license. And that was kind of bare bones just to get started. And then one of the things that this particular company wanted everybody to do once they did that was to start to pursue other credentials. So for example, when I was still there, I had started pursuing the CFP, the Certified Financial Planner designation. And after a couple of years, I had transitioned over to another firm and took a little bit of a break from that, still had all my licenses and everything active, and then really kind of decided I wanted to continue to pursue that. So, even like right now, I have several designations. So I'm a certified financial planner. I also have the CLU designation, which stands for Chartered Life Underwriter, which is an insurance designation. And then also RICP, which is a retirement income certified professional. So there's different paths that you can go down and different areas that you can choose to focus on or in. And there's designations that are, somewhat supportive of that. And I think the CFP is probably the most easily recognizable and distinct, if you will, designation. A lot of people look at that as kind of the gold standard out there. But it was a combination of the nudge initially, and then just me being the geek that I am, wanting to kind of continue to pursue that education. And, as a lot of us like to say, we become students of the profession, and you can always get better in anything, but, you want to be the best you can for your clients. And so continuing education along with, pursuit of certain designations can certainly help with that. So I don't need to have all those to do what I do on a day-to-day basis, but it was kind of a path I chose to go down. And, everyone looks at it a little bit differently, but it was something I took pretty seriously.
Hey, we're always here for anyone that wants to talk nerdy to us, right? we like to geek out. So and just kind of a side question, are you a fiduciary?
Yes.
Okay. Just curious. I always see the commercials and it's like a fiduciary always is always
right.
planning in your own interest.
Yeah, there's people can hold themselves out in different capacities, but if you're a certified financial planner, you kind of make that voluntary decision that you're going to hold yourself to a higher standard at all times. And so, yeah, that's part of it.
How would you say your investment strategies have changed personally since you've kind of switched careers and gears in terms of financial advising?
I've become very boring. So I have a gentleman that is on my show a fair amount, and we worked together for a time, and we always used to joke around because he was very much into individual security selection and stock picking and things like that, and he's actually pretty good at it. I can tell you, and I openly say this to everybody, half jokingly, but it's also true, I am terrible at that, right? So I used to think before I got in the industry, like, oh, I know exactly what I need to do, and I'm gonna invest in this, and And the more time went on, and the more popular sort of indexing and index funds had become, I realized pretty quickly that I wasn't as good as I thought I was. So my investment strategy is fairly boring, but people say that whether it's businesses or investments or whatnot, those are typically the ones that are more profitable, right? You go down to your local dry cleaners or some business that seems very boring and repetitive, but they're probably some of the more successful businesses in town.
Right. What would you say has been your favorite investment vehicle as of late?
I really like the single family rentals. So I mentioned this briefly before as far as turnkey. I think you guys might have had, if memory serves, relatively recently, somebody on the show that talked a little bit about this. Do you want me to go into turnkey, or do you think the listeners are pretty well up to speed?
Whatever you'd like. If you want to give a brief overview, maybe someone missed the episode, go ahead.
Okay. So I jokingly say a lot of times I'm the most ambitious, lazy person that I know. And so I cannot swing a hammer. I cannot change a light bulb. You should see us trying to do it at the house with one of those extension poles on the vaulted ceilings. It's pretty comical. But so I was thinking, how in the world am I going to own rental property? Like this just seems like, you picture the person that has the pickup truck and the ladder and all that sort of thing, and they're working on their
It's
properties. And
not you.
there are plenty of people that do that. And that was just absolutely not me. And so anyway, the way that I invest in single family is through a method called turnkey. And everybody, it's kind of a buzzword, and it means different things to different people. And so I don't want to get too long-winded about it, but basically everything is served to you on a silver platter. So the analogy that I like to use sometimes is I could go to the grocery store and buy a piece of steak and come home and cook it myself and season it and do all that sort of thing and probably save a few dollars. Or I could go downtown or wherever and go out to a nice restaurant. I'm going to pay more, but they're going to serve it to me on a silver platter, and it's going to be way better than the steak that I cooked. So I look at that the same way, with these turnkey rentals. And so it's, buying from an organization that finds distressed properties, rehabs them, they're vertically integrated, they have their own property management division in-house. They're doing everything, right? And of course, you pay for that. You pay a price for that. And I have other people in my circle that do everything themselves, and they swear by it. It just wasn't for me. And so the reason that it's my favorite investment, I know this is going to sound really cheesy, but I like logging in, whether it's on my phone or on the laptop, to the property management portal to see who paid rent on the first. Did this person pay on the second? Who's on the third? And just kind of see the income coming in, and look at the property management reports and kind of geek out about it a little bit. It's quite frankly probably not the most profitable investment. I mean, long term it probably will be, but in the short term it's not necessarily lighting the world on fire. But it is something that's fairly interesting to keep up with. And because that income and that rent is coming in on a monthly basis, it's something that keeps you interested, or it keeps me interested. And so, I kind of geek out on that. So I would say, if I had to pick a quote unquote favorite, that would probably be it.
Are you finding these properties, or is this company finding them for you?
They're finding them. Yeah. So they're doing everything. They're in touch with the wholesalers that are, sourcing properties. They have their own acquisitions team that's doing it. And I had gone out and visited several different companies before, picking one to do business with. And there was a time that I was looking to kind of branch out and potentially get into another market. And I just couldn't find another group that operates as efficiently as these folks do. And not everything's perfect, don't get me wrong. First house I bought it had a 2-car garage, and there were no garage doors, and they were trying to tell me that they weren't going to put them in. So I had to get the owner involved, right? So things don't always go perfectly, but in general, over the time that I've been with them, they've been excellent. And yeah, they literally do everything.
Are the properties local to you?
No, they're probably about 8 hours or so away. So usually, it's not every year, but every couple of years we'll make a trip out there. And I know, again, before I started investing with them, I actually went out there as well and got to meet the team and met the owner and toured some properties and got to see the property management office and all that sort of thing. But they're not local, so I can't, and it's probably a good thing for me because I'm kind of crazy sometimes, right? I can't drive by and say, hey, get your stuff off the lawn. I got a letter one time from the health department that said there was like chicken feed in the front yard, and I'm like, what in the world? These people have been there for going on 4 years at the time, and all of a sudden there was never an issue. They pay rent on time. There's very, very little. I might have had 2 repair bills in 4 years, no turnover on that property, right? And all of a sudden you're like, what? Why am I getting this letter? And contact the property management company, and the next thing you know, it's taken care of. So it's kind of good, because otherwise I probably would have driven by and went out there and tried to clean it up myself or something. I don't know.
I first ask for eggs, then tell them they need to clean it up.
Yeah.
So, okay. So it sounds like all these properties are local to this kind of turnkey company that you're using.
Right.
Okay. Are you wanting to grow this portfolio anymore?
Yes, actually. And we have had a really hard time with it. In fact, just as recently as this week, there were 2 properties that had come up, and you kind of get on a waiting list at this point because they become fairly popular. And so when you finally get to the top of the list, they start sending out properties, and they'll have pictures and a little voice memo, and they'll say, here's, this is a 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, and this zip code, here's the address, here's what it's going to rent for, here's the purchase price, and there's pictures and the scope of work and everything is there. Well, with the interest rate environment that we're in, there's a lot of people that are still making deals work. I was listening to your most recent show, I think, with a gentleman that was on that was worth 51 million, and he was saying the interest rates are irrelevant, right? And you can still make deals work, and you absolutely can, depending on the type of investing that you're doing. And that's where I think, quite frankly, I'm at a little bit of a disadvantage, is because I don't want to be the person that's, doing the acquisition side. I don't want to be the person that's out there looking for the properties and trying to make a deal and doing those sorts of things. Nothing wrong with that. To those that do, more power to them. It's just not my style. And so it's a little bit more difficult, I think, on the single family side anyway, to make the numbers pencil. And so there were a couple that came up that were in zip codes that we really liked and areas that we really liked. A couple of them were really close to the properties we already had or we already have. And, I couldn't pull the trigger. I just could not get it to work. And it was one of those things where it's a lot of, it's all relative, but it's a fairly decent chunk and amount of money to put down, because now, even with rates where they are, instead of putting 20% down, a lot of times to get a better rate, you need to put 25% down. And then even if you want to, you can buy the rate down. So if you're not happy with the rate, the word is, then you got to buy, you got to buy it down and pay some points. And so by the time you go through all that and you figure out how much cash am I actually going to put into this thing, and then what is my cash flow going to be on a monthly basis, it just doesn't work. And I understand that that's one of several components in terms of total return. I don't want to get too geeky here, but in long term, I could probably still make an argument for why it could make sense. But going back to what I said at the beginning of the show about looking to get to the point of financial independence sooner rather than later, it doesn't necessarily meet our goal of generating that cash flow now to the extent that we would like it to. So at this particular time, even though we do want to continue to grow the portfolio, we haven't been very active. We've been looking, we just haven't pulled the trigger. And so, I've been doing more on the syndication side than I have been on the single family side. But both, quite honestly, have slowed down. Things are changing out there, especially in commercial too. So we haven't done much lately, but we would like to in the future.
Very nice. So how long did it take you from the time you started your wealth building journey to make your first million?
I was age 35. I'm 39 right now. I started investing at 22. So what's that? 13 years.
Okay. And then how about your second million?
4 years. 39 this year.
Nice little snowball there. That escalated quickly.
Yeah. Well, I got lucky too, but yeah, things, yeah, they did.
And you mentioned your wife, and she's seems to be involved here. What kind of role has she played in this wealth building? And is it something she's also interested in? You've done together, or kind of talk us through that partnership?
She's very much interested in it. So I'm quite a bit older than she is, about 5 years or so older than she is. And when we first met, I kind of introduced her, I think, in a lot of ways to this whole concept of financial independence. Like, she was still investing a little bit in, her workplace retirement plan at the time and things like that. But I don't think she was exposed to some of the real estate stuff. And I mean, it seems like it's all I talk about, right? So she's definitely taken an interest to that and become more and more involved in it. And actually, it's kind of a short, funny story. When she sold her primary residence and ended up moving in here with me, what she did basically with the proceeds of the sale was she went out and bought her first turnkey rental. So she definitely was on board with it. And at that moment, I'm like, okay, she's the one, So yeah, but we're kind of doing this together. She's very much interested in it, but she just hadn't kind of been at it as long. So I've had a longer runway. I started earlier. I was kind of immersed in it, and she's kind of coming up to speed at this point.
That's great.
Yeah.
So what's the goal? What does retirement look like?
Well, it's funny you asked that. So we look at it as kind of a two-phased retirement, if you will. The first one, and I don't know where I got this other than when I was younger, before I even got in the industry. For whatever reason, I always used to say I'm going to retire at 50. And that was just a number, And that still in some way, shape, or form is the goal, but I don't think I'm going to retire and do nothing, And so we've run the numbers with financial software, kind of a hazard of what I do for a living. And basically, we did factor in, possibly having a couple of kids. Like I said, we have our first on the way now. And so, I was joking with her earlier today. I said, because we just found out like literally a week or so ago. And I said, this is going to delay my retirement by about 5 years. She just laughed, right? So it's one of those things. But we look at it as a two-phase retirement. So phase one is sort of this quote unquote earlier retirement where we build up the real estate related components of the portfolio to essentially be able to cover, just basic living expenses. And people have different names for it. I think I've heard like Coast Fi and Barista Fi and all this kind of stuff. But basically to the point where, you could pretty much do whatever you wanted to do, and the latter half is going to take care of itself. And we're kind of already there. Like literally, if we could just do something now and never saved another penny and just paid our bills, we'd be fine by traditional retirement age, right? But phase one is real estate related to cover basic living expenses now. And then phase two sort of is where the more quote unquote traditional types of retirement plans would come into play. The thing that makes that kind of tough, and I don't know if you want, we'll get into this later, is there's different schools of thought on leverage and liability management. And do you pay things off? Do you not? And why? And do you scale or do you not? And to what extent do you do that? And so there's a lot of moving parts that we think about quite a bit, and moving the different puzzle pieces around, because I think the biggest quote unquote risk or vulnerability point for us is probably going to be in that age 50 to 60 or age 55 to 60 range, where yes, there's some strategies that you can utilize to tap into certain types of plans earlier than you otherwise might. But at the same time, if things aren't set up and structured in a certain way, the cash flows might not be as high as you would like them to be. I don't know if that answers your question. There's a lot of moving parts.
No, however you answer the question is exactly the perfect way to answer the question.
Okay, good.
Is there a certain net worth you'd like to get to before you retire?
A certain net worth I'd like to get to lifetime would be about 10 million, just because, and I completely pulled that out of thin air, but being a Deca millionaire sounds pretty neat. But in the grand scheme of things, before retirement, not necessarily, but by the time we pass away, I'd like to be, in the 10 million plus range.
All right. Very good. How has your lifestyle changed since you became a millionaire?
Well, one thing I did, and it was funny because, again, going back to the most recent episode that you guys had, the gentleman that was worth 51 million, he said, I don't care about any of this stuff. And he mentioned Rolex a couple of times. Well, silly me, when I was younger, that's something I always wanted. And I thought to myself, you know what, I could never afford that. And all of a sudden, when I told myself when I hit my first million, I'm going to do something special that's going to be something that I remember. And so I actually bought my first, and to this point only, Rolex is sort of a milestone marker for me, something that meant something to me. Some people probably look at that and think that's very, very silly. Why would you do that? You could do this, that, or the other thing with the money and do the time value of money calculation. But it was just a symbol of kind of an accomplishment to myself that, just an accomplishment that I got, I was a millionaire, right? I hit my first million in net worth, and it was kind of a big deal to me. And, I still have that timepiece to this day. So has my lifestyle changed other than that silly splurge, right? That's one of the questions you guys ask sometimes, that, things that you've spent money on that brought you enjoyment. And I really do like, I like it's a Date Just 41. I really do like that watch. But other than that, I don't really think much has changed. We live in a very modest home. It's newer construction, but it's, 3-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 1,600 square feet with an office, 2-car garage. It's nothing overly fancy. We could live in something so much nicer, so much bigger. I jokingly say I'm going to die in this house, right? And eventually, depending on how many kids we have, we may get something bigger. But I think there's certain decisions that people make in life that, are going to have a very large bearing on how their finances turn out. I've also made some mistakes. I'm kind of a car guy in a way. Not that I know much about the gears and all that kind of stuff, but just like having a nice vehicle. And so you have to pick and choose where you want to spend your money, right? And so I don't want to be house poor. We travel a lot. We do different things. And so, but nothing has changed. I really don't think anything has changed at all. It's just one foot in front of the other, business as usual, and just kind of continuing on the journey. Other than the Rolex purchase, there was nothing earth-shattering or life-changing, I don't think, that happened. In fact, one of the things that I'm working on is getting better at spending money. because we call it the year of spending, right? I bought a 2023 Sea-Doo GTX 170 for anybody out there that's into skis, water skis. And it was the best purchase I think that I've ever made. I've gotten so much enjoyment. It's probably the most money I've ever spent on the stupidest thing that's going to produce zero income and has zero, it doesn't have zero value, right? I could sell it, but it's just brings me a lot of joy, right? We did an addition on our back deck and put on a little, added onto the roof and did a covered deck and things like that this year. So we've done a couple different things where we've spent more money than I initially thought we were going to, but it's brought a lot of enjoyment to us, and that makes us really happy. And I'm starting to realize that, there's more to the money game than just, people say, oh, well, about having money or not having money, but it's really about what it can do for you and how it makes you feel and the freedoms that it can give you. And so I'm trying to learn how to enjoy it and spend it, not just save and invest every penny. And I think I've surprised myself for sure, and probably some people in our circle too, because they're like, wow, Cash Flow King would want to invest that. He would never want to buy a Sea-Doo, I mean, it's kind of weird, but yeah.
It's an interesting concept because I think this is something people who have been saving for a long time or investing for a long time struggle with in general. It's this hurdle of enjoying the fruits of your labor, yep. And how much enjoyment does it give you to put more away that you may never, ever use, right? If you're going back to like the Die with Zero book, that is something that,
yep.
We like a lot of principles from that. But, is it worth going to the nest egg that may never get touched, or is it worth spending a little bit of that now to really enhance my life experience?
Yeah. And I think part of the reason that I think that way is partially shaped just in what I do for work, because I see a lot of people in the retirement area that work their whole lives, right? And they sacrifice and they scrimp and save, and they're putting money away and they're doing different things. But I've seen many instances where, life happens, people might pass away sooner than expected, and all of a sudden they never do get to enjoy the money. And, had they known, I mean, again, nobody knows when they're going to go, right? But you probably would do things differently. And so that's the way I try to approach things now. I don't know if it came from a song or what, but I joke all the time, what are you up to? I'm just living my best life. I'm going on a trip, or I'm doing this, or, hey, we're taking the Sea-Doo out, I don't care how much the gas is today. You know what I mean? So you have to just learn to embrace things and enjoy things. But at the same time, it is extremely important to still plan for the future, right? You have to find that balance. And I think for a lot of people, I know for me, for us, it's always a challenge. It's like a never ending challenge. But I think more and more people that are in this space, in this community, in terms of financial independence and just people that are interested in personal finance, like you said, it's something that a lot of us, we have to grapple with. And sometimes, it's like, oh, well, this person's a millionaire, or this person's a multimillionaire. Oh, poor you. You know what I mean? Because there's going to be points in life where, maybe you have to cut back. Maybe you can't, buy the coffee. Like we have we joke about our Starbucks habit, right? And we go out for coffee a fair amount. And so we recently made this little rule where every time we go, whether it's fast food or Starbucks or whatever, and whatever we spend, we have to invest the same amount in the brokerage account. That's just a new thing we started doing. So if we go to Starbucks and spend $15 or, whatever it is, 14 something, okay, well, 14 something's getting transferred into the brokerage account and it's getting invested. And it's just kind of a little game that we play, but you're still not depriving yourself. You're enjoying what you want, but also at the same time, you're still investing. And so we try to play games and make it fun.
That is hilarious. I need to know, logistically speaking, do you just keep like a note section on your phone, or do you do it in real time as you're placing the order?
Yeah, I'm in the drive-thru, right? So I'm in the drive-thru, and that's exactly what I'm doing. And quick tip or fun fact or whatever. She was really big into Starbucks, more so than I was. And I always used to make fun of her for it. And people would say, oh, you're buying attitude in a cup, and people are Starbucks snobs and all this kind of stuff. Right. Starbucks is not a sponsor of the show as far as I know anyway. So it was one of those things where I learned on the app, well, if you bought a gift card and then you scan and pay with the app, you earn 2 stars instead of just paying with your normal credit or debit card and earning 1 star. And so, the other day I was there, I bought like a $25 gift card, and right after I placed my order, I'm sitting in the drive-thru and boom, I logged into the brokerage account, $25 in the brokerage account. Is it going to make you rich? No, but it's a fun little game and every little bit adds up. So it's kind of a new thing that we literally just started this year,
Oh, that's hilarious. I love
Yeah.
that.
Yep.
All right. Well, let's wrap up with some rapid fire, and
Okay.
then at the end, well, we can cut this part out. At the end, I'll ask you about your podcast where people can reach you. Okay.
Oh,
Does that work?
cool. Yeah. All right. That's fine.
Okay. All right. I don't think I forgot about that. All right. Rapid fire questions. What is the most fun you've had with money?
Probably the Sea-Doo. I'm going to keep going back to it because it just brings me a lot of joy. And there's usually when you spend a lot of money on something, you look back and say, I wish I didn't do that. Not the case with that. So I'd say the Sea-Doo.
What is the best bucket list experience you've had?
I don't know that it's a bucket list experience, but the most expensive trip that we've gone on, and we try to do everything on points now. We're really into the points game. But when we went on our honeymoon, we went to Punta Cana in the Dominican Republic, and we had spent about $10,000 on that trip, which is by far the most I'd ever spent on a trip.
All right. What's the craziest thing you've ever done to earn money?
I have two. The first one is we drove for a rideshare company. I just thought it would be interesting. My wife, who was my girlfriend at the time, she thought it would be interesting. So she started driving for the rideshare company. And then her father, who was retired at the time, just for fun, started driving for them as well. And the irony of it all is when she was working at her day job, she was making more money on the referral fees than any of us were making actually doing the rides. So we found out very quickly that, at least in our part of the country, it was not very profitable. So that was the first one. And then the second one, I actually played poker for a living for about 4 months when I was in a transition period, moving from the Northeast down to the Midwest, just to I was in an apartment at the time and I didn't want to break the lease. And so I could sit on the couch or I could try to make some money. And I had a roommate in college that actually played professionally. And I thought, you know what, I can do that. I can't. But I did for 4 months and it made it work. So those are probably the two.
Did you make money or lose money in that 4 months?
I did make money, but it was basically scraping by. I didn't want to have to drain the savings account. So it was, I can just watch my savings go down and down and down, or I can give this a go and just try to grind it out. And it was basically break even. Well, not break even, it was winning. But as far as like my expenses and what I made from it, it was pretty much a wash at the end. So I was able to pay for my lifestyle, but nothing else. I wasn't saving anything extra. I wasn't investing anything extra during that 4 months.
All right. What is a closely held belief that you've changed your mind on?
Debt, in a big, big way. And I know we didn't really get too much into this on the breakdown side, but I used to be a big believer in debt free. When I originally bought the house or built the house, I was planning on making an extra mortgage payment every year, and I would shave 5 years, I think it was at the time, off the loan. And instead of paying it off in 30 years, I would pay it off in 25. And then I realized what can be done with positive financial arbitrage. And there's a difference between having something that's paid off and having something that's effectively paid off. There's a difference between, when I worked at the first company I was with, we had folks that had very, very large portfolios that would want to borrow money. I didn't understand why at the time. I was just getting into the business. And now I get it, because if you can make your money work harder on the asset side than the debt you're incurring on the liability side, you're that much further ahead. And the more money you can do that with and the longer you can do that, the better off you're going to be. But I think our society, when they hear that word, we're so conditioned to think about things like credit card debt and, quote unquote, bad types of debt. And so nobody wants to carry that. And I'm not suggesting anybody do. But as far as like real estate and investment loans and primary residence mortgages and things like that, I mean, I think I mentioned it briefly before. We have not quite a little under 880, call it $900,000 of debt. I don't lose any sleep at night because it's effectively, it's all outsourced essentially. And most of that is on the rentals, which pay for themselves. So that's something I didn't understand early on. And so my belief changed in a big way a handful of years ago about that. I will never make an extra principal payment on a mortgage again.
Interesting. What's a key lesson you learned from childhood?
Probably what I mentioned at the beginning of the show, where they just basically, I didn't have a lot of financial education. I mean, I don't think anybody really does. We need to do a better job of putting that in the school system, and that's a whole separate conversation. But basically, when I was told, don't do what we did, put something away from your very first paycheck and you'll never miss it. And I had no idea why, but I just knew I was being told that for a reason. And I just kind of, head down and, just do your thing, go to work and put money away. And the next thing you know, you wake up one day and you're like, holy crap, that worked out pretty well. I mean, so that was probably the biggest financial lesson I think that I learned kind of by accident.
How do you get ahead in life?
That's a great question. How do you get ahead in life? I don't know if this is how you get ahead, but I'm a big believer in, you are who you are when nobody else is looking, right? You have to be a person of integrity. And I think if you are genuine with people and you are a person of integrity, that comes back to you tenfold. And so, yeah, I don't know if that's how you get ahead, but that's something that I live by no matter what.
Last piece of advice for someone who's just starting out.
What I mentioned before, which is, absolutely plan for the future, but don't forget to live your life in the present. I think I went through a period of time where I wasn't doing that. I know people that, and there's nothing wrong with hard work. I worked hard and I still do to some extent for a very long time. But there's a point where it's almost too much. And I know and see people that just, their family life might not be as balanced as they would like it to be, or they're spending an astronomical amount of time at work and they're not necessarily spending enough time at home. And so it used to be, chasing the dollar signs. I want to make more money. And everybody to some extent does. But the thing I value now more than anything is having that balance and freedom of time. In fact, one of the things that I did last year, and I'll probably continue this year, is within reason, trying to take off as much time as I can, still make sure that clients and everything are taken care of, but just really trying to enjoy. It's not about making more money, but it's about, just enjoying your life and having that balance. And I think that's very, very important. And I think there was a time in my life, especially in my early 20s, where I wasn't doing that. And it took a toll on me. And if I had to go back, I don't know that I would change anything, because it's kind of one of those like school of hard knocks. You go through what you go through, but I don't think I realized that at the time. And so I think we all need to some extent, just be able and willing to take a step back and breathe and really appreciate what's around us, and not necessarily just, always be working all the time.
Thank you. Cashflow King, where can people find out more about you and some of your thoughts?
Yeah. So thank you for asking. I've kept it very clean, I think, on today's show, but I did start a podcast of my own for fun a couple years ago. It's called the Real Talk Personal Finance Podcast. Our email is realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com. A fair warning, we are not necessarily a family-friendly show. We are, we cut up. We're somewhat vulgar. We like to just, to me, it was an outlet to be able to say things and still be educational in nature and also entertaining, and maybe say some things or talk in a way that I couldn't necessarily do at work, and just to kind of cut up a little bit and have some fun, kind of let your hair down type of show. So that's what we do. And you can check us out, anywhere that you're listening to this podcast. You can probably find us. It's a little picture of a microphone, Real Talk Personal Finance.
And it's there that you go by the Cashflow King. Is that correct?
That's right. Yeah. So the joke's on me kind of when it comes to that, but I had to figure out, okay, how do I do this and, not get in trouble, because work doesn't like it when you start a podcast, I guess. So I had to figure out a name, and I had just been kind of getting into real estate at the time. And so it was all about cash flow, right? So I had to come up with a name. And so I just came up with Cashflow King and went by that. And anybody that is a guest on the show, we all have code names, which is kind of fun and interesting. And we try to keep it light. Everybody's anonymous, but we are real people. I am really in the industry. If you write us, we will write you back. So feel free to reach out. But yeah, that's kind of how that whole thing started. And when I say the joke's on me, it's some of these syndications. I won't go too long here, but in commercial real estate, and a lot of them, their distributions and whatnot have dried up a little bit, at least temporarily, given the market conditions. And so, I kind of laugh at myself sometimes, because when times were good, yeah, cash flow was all right. And then when times aren't so great, it's like, yeah, well, the joke's on you, pal.
Maybe you're demoted to the cash flow queen or cash flow Jack.
Yeah, cash flow Jack. Okay, there we go. I like that. Cash flow Jack. Yeah.
All right, and then cash flow king with a net worth just over $2 million. Thank you so much for coming on the show today.
Thanks for having me. It was great. Hey guys, Cashflow King here. Hopefully you enjoyed that interview from me being on the Millionaires Unveiled podcast. wanted to record a quick outro for you just with some updated figures. There's really not a ton that's changed, but like I mentioned at the beginning of the show, that was recorded in early January of 2024, and we're about 5 months later now here at the beginning of June of 2024. So some of the numbers have changed just ever so slightly, but it was enough to, I guess, put a little bit of an update on there. So at the time that I went on that show, assets were about 2.9 and liabilities were about 880 for net worth of just north of 2 million. At this point, assets are sitting at just over 3, about 3,060,000 or so. Liability side dropped down to about 863. So net worth now is sitting closer to about 2.2. And just in case you're wondering, that's a combination of things as you might expect. Everything from a little bit of debt pay down, a little bit of appreciation on the price on the single family rentals, and then the biggest contributor is going to be an increase in retirement account values, and that's due to both contributions plus investment growth. So all in all, we got a difference of about 180,000 in the right direction in about 5 months so far this year. That's getting ready to change again. Spoiler alert for one of the next episodes. It might be the next one or the one after. Haven't recorded it yet, but I'm in the process of buying another turnkey rental, so we'll have some updated figures there, but that should keep the net worth about the same. There's really no change in absolute value, but it should bring the asset side of the equation up to about 3.2, and will also bring correspondingly the liability section up to about 973. So before you know it, we'll be able to celebrate $1 million in debt. Not quite yet, but we're getting close. So anyway, just wanted to give you guys a quick update there. Hopefully you enjoyed the show. Don't forget to send the show a text if you use your show notes. There's a little link that says send us a text message, and that will go into our fan mail box. We'll respond to that in audio format on an upcoming show. If you want to write the show, as always, realtalkpersonalfinance@gmail.com, and we will respond to you via email if that's easier for you. Thanks again for listening, and we will see you in the next episode.
Check the mic and make sure it sound right, boys.